You know, there comes a moment often much later when the one who pushed you away finally realizes something. They realize you weren't just someone, you were the one who showed up. You were the one who tried to love them, not through their highlight reel, but through their hesitation, through their distance, through their fear of being known. But avoidant people, they run, not because you weren't enough. They run because love exposes them. It brings light to places they've spent years keeping in the dark. It asks them to be seen, and for some people, being seen feels scarier than being alone. And so, they do what they've always done. They pull back, they minimize, they act like connection is a threat. They convince themselves that detachment is peace, that silence is control, that distance is strength. But time has a way of revealing truth, because one day, when the noise fades and the distractions lose their shine, they'll remember you. Not because you were dramatic or demanding, but because you were safe. You were the person who made effort feel effortless, and when they realize that, it hits you were never replaceable, because energy like yours doesn't come twice, because emotional presence like yours doesn't have a clone. Because once someone has experienced genuine care, every imitation after that just tastes hollow. Here's what you need to understand: you didn't lose, you didn't fail, you showed up in a world that glorifies withdrawal. You opened your heart to someone who wasn't ready to meet you there. That's not weakness, that's courage. And when they finally understand the depth of what they let go of, it's not your job to be there. Healing means knowing that you were already whole even when someone couldn't recognize your worth. You were never waiting to be chosen. You were always waiting to be seen, so let them realize, let them circle back in their silence. Let them sit in the emptiness they created, because when the avoidant finally understands that you were never replaceable, you won't need their validation, you'll already know it. Real emotional presence is something that lingers long after words fade and gestures are forgotten. When someone shows up for you with genuine care, when they listen not just to reply but to understand, they create a kind of emotional imprint that can't be duplicated. It's not about grand gestures or constant attention, it's about the energy they bring when they're around you. The way they look at you like you matter. The way they remember small details you thought no one noticed. That kind of presence becomes a reference point in your life, even when they're gone. You may not realize it at first, but every conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every laugh shared in safety becomes a quiet marker of what real connection feels like. When you meet someone who shows up authentically, they don't perform love, they live it. They don't make you feel like you need to fight for their focus or chase their approval. They bring peace into the room. They make you feel seen, not because you're perfect, but because you're human. And once you've experienced that level of sincerity, it's almost impossible to forget. You may try to find it again in others, but there's always something missing: that depth, that stillness, that feeling of being truly known. It's not that other people are bad or wrong, but there's a difference between being around someone who's available in body and someone who's present in spirit. This is why real presence can't be replaced. It's not a formula or a pattern that someone else can replicate. It's not something you can force, mimic, or recreate through effort. It comes from alignment when one person's honesty meets another's openness. You can find people who say the same things, give the same compliments, even make the same promises, but energy tells the truth long before words do. You can feel when someone's heart is half open, when their attention is elsewhere, when they're showing up out of habit instead of intention. For the avoidant, this realization often comes late. When they move on or withdraw, they might assume that closeness is replaceable, that anyone can fill that space. But later, when they encounter others who are distant, distracted, or emotionally guarded, they begin to notice the difference. They remember how it felt to be met with warmth instead of walls, and that memory becomes louder over time. Because once you've known what it's like to be loved without conditions, every surface-level connection feels temporary. Every half-hearted effort feels like noise. Real emotional presence is timeless. It doesn't fade when the person leaves, it becomes a standard. A quiet voice reminding you that love is supposed to feel like this asterisk, calm, consistent, and safe. That's why you were never replaceable. Because what you brought into that connection wasn't just affection, it was authenticity. And authenticity doesn't come around often. Once someone has experienced it, they may spend years trying to find it again, only to realize that what they lost was never ordinary, it was rare, it was real. Avoidance often wears the mask of indifference, but beneath that calm surface lies fear not of love itself, but of what love reveals. To be loved deeply means to be seen. It means allowing someone close enough to witness your flaws, your insecurities, your contradictions. For an avoidant, that kind of exposure feels dangerous. They've built their sense of safety around control, controlling how much others see, how much they feel, how close anyone can get. When love knocks on the door and asks for honesty, vulnerability, and trust, it threatens that structure. So they retreat, not because you were too much, but because being seen makes them feel like they're losing the very protection they've built to survive. Avoidance often begins in early experiences, moments when closeness led to disappointment, or when emotional needs were met with rejection or silence. Over time, the avoidant learns that vulnerability equals pain, that connection equals loss, that it's safer to depend on oneself than to risk being let down. They convince themselves that independence is strength, that detachment is peace. But deep down, they crave the very thing they fear, intimacy. It's a quiet battle, the longing to be loved and the terror of being truly known. When they meet someone who sees through the walls, who offers patience and understanding instead of pressure, it unsettles them. They start to feel something unfamiliar, comfort that feels uncomfortable. You might think they'd relax into it, but for the avoidant, comfort can trigger suspicion. They wonder what it means, when it will disappear, when the person will change. Their instinct tells them to pull back before they lose control. So they withdraw, convincing themselves that distance is clarity. They suppress emotion to regain balance, even if it means losing someone who genuinely cared. This is why avoidance is not coldness, it's fear-wearing confidence. It's self-protection disguised as self-sufficiency. The avoidant is not rejecting love, they're rejecting exposure. Because love requires being known, and being known means giving someone access to your softest parts, the ones you've spent years hiding. The tragedy is that in trying to protect themselves, they end up confirming their own fears. They push away those who would have stayed. They reinforce the belief that closeness leads to loss, and in the silence that follows, they feel both safer and lonelier. Understanding this doesn't mean you should chase or fix them. It simply helps you see that their distance was never about your worth. Their avoidance wasn't proof that you were hard to love. It was evidence that love was something they didn't yet know how to accept. When someone has lived most of their life in emotional survival mode, genuine connection feels foreign and sometimes frightening, but fear doesn't erase truth. No matter how far they run, love still lingers as a mirror, reminding them of what they truly wanted all along, to be seen and to be safe in that seeing. Loving someone who keeps their distance requires a level of strength most people never recognize. It's easy to love when love is returned freely, when communication flows, when vulnerability is met with warmth. But when you care for someone who flinches at closeness, who retreats just as you begin to connect, it takes courage to stay soft. Because every moment of openness risks rejection. Every honest word could be met with silence, and still you choose to show up not out of desperation, but because your heart understands something their fear cannot. Love is not about control, it's about presence. When you give love to someone who struggles to receive it, you're not weak, you're demonstrating emotional bravery. It's an act of strength to meet someone's guarded heart with patience, to hold space for a person who doesn't yet know how to hold it for themselves. You're standing in front of someone who has learned to survive by keeping their distance, and you're showing them that intimacy doesn't have to mean danger, that love doesn't always lead to loss, that connection can be safe. This doesn't mean tolerating neglect or accepting emotional unavailability as love. It means recognizing your own courage in choosing to love with clarity, to care without losing your boundaries, to express without expectation, to give without erasing yourself. Many people confuse vulnerability with weakness, but it takes strength to remain open when you've been hurt, misunderstood, or dismissed. The easy path is to harden, to match withdrawal with indifference. The brave path is to stay honest, to love with integrity even when the outcome is uncertain. Showing up emotionally doesn't mean chasing. It means being authentic, being the kind of person who chooses truth over games, depth over ego. It's about saying, "This is how I feel," even when you know the other person might not meet you there. That level of honesty is not naive, it's rare. It's what separates those who experience love deeply from those who only skim its surface. When you look back, you may question if you gave too much, if your openness was a mistake. But the truth is, there's no shame in giving your best. The mistake isn't in caring, it's in believing that caring makes you weak. Every act of love you gave was proof of your capacity to feel, to empathize, to connect. Those are qualities that build real relationships, not destroy them. And even if the avoidant couldn't receive what you offered, it doesn't erase the value of your effort. Your courage to show up is what makes you different. You were willing to risk vulnerability in a world that rewards detachment. That's not a flaw, it's your strength. You stood in love without armor, and that's something only the emotionally brave can do. When someone finally realizes your worth after losing you, it can stir a mix of emotions: validation, sadness, even anger. But what you have to understand is that their realization is not your responsibility. You were not meant to carry the weight of their awakening, nor were you placed in their life to teach them what love is through your pain. People learn lessons in their own time, and often too late. You may have tried to show them through your consistency, your care, your patience, but awareness can't be forced. It blooms only when someone is ready to face the truth, and sometimes that readiness arrives long after you've stopped waiting. It's natural to want them to see what they missed, to wish they could finally recognize the value of what you gave. But that moment, if it ever comes, belongs to them, not you. You don't need to stand there when it happens. You don't need to return to the place where you once felt unseen just to witness their regret. Healing means understanding that closure isn't found in their acknowledgement. It's found in your peace. The strength lies in knowing that you did your part, you showed up, you gave honestly, and you left with integrity. That is your closure. When they finally realize your worth, it's often because life has shown them contrast. They encounter relationships that lack your patience, your kindness, your steadiness. They meet people who treat affection like a game or use vulnerability as leverage, and suddenly they remember how different it felt with you. But by the time they understand, you've already evolved. You've grown into someone who no longer needs to be understood by the person who once overlooked you. Their understanding might be late, but your healing doesn't wait for it. It's tempting to think that their regret should change something that may be. If they finally see your value, things could be different. But real healing is recognizing that their awareness doesn't erase the pain their absence caused. You can accept their realization without reopening old wounds. You can acknowledge their growth without stepping back into a story that once hurt you. You are not obligated to relive a lesson just because someone else has finally learned it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away when the understanding comes, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because your worth isn't validated by someone else's recognition, it's affirmed by the way you continue to live, love, and choose yourself after being misunderstood. Their realization might bring them clarity, but it's your distance that brings you freedom. You don't owe them another chance to prove what you already know. When they finally see your value, let it be their awakening, not your invitation to return. Your responsibility was never to make them understand, it was simply to love truly and let go when love stopped being mutual. You were never waiting to be chosen, you were waiting to be understood. There's a profound difference between those two. Waiting to be chosen places your worth in someone else's hands, tying your value to their recognition. But waiting to be understood, that's about longing for connection, not validation. It's about wanting someone to see your heart, your intentions, the quiet ways you love, and the effort you make even when it goes unnoticed. At your core, you never wanted to be picked like an option. You wanted to be seen as a person complex, deep, and worthy of being met with the same level of presence you offered. When love isn't reciprocated, it's easy to mistake the rejection for inadequacy. You start to wonder if you should have been quieter, easier, more detached. But the truth is, you were never hard to love, you were simply too honest for someone who wasn't ready for honesty. You offered emotional clarity in a world that glorifies confusion. You wanted depth in a connection built on half-truths. You spoke from your heart, and they listened with fear. That doesn't make you unworthy, it makes you authentic. Being whole doesn't mean being perfect, it means recognizing that your value exists independently of who acknowledges it. You don't need someone's approval to confirm your worth. You don't need a relationship to complete you. You already carry everything within you that makes love meaningful: empathy, honesty, compassion, resilience. The moment you stop searching for someone to complete you realize that you were never missing pieces, you were just seeking a mirror, someone capable of reflecting back what you already are. True healing happens when you stop chasing proof. You stop needing someone to come back and admit they were wrong. You stop hoping that understanding will come from the same person who once misunderstood you. Instead, you begin to find peace in your own clarity. You start to understand yourself, your patterns, your choices, your capacity to feel deeply, and that understanding becomes your strength. There's something powerful about standing in your own wholeness after being dismissed. You realize that love was never supposed to shrink you. It was supposed to expand you. And when someone's fear couldn't hold space for your depth, it wasn't your job to become smaller. It was your moment to step back and remember who you are. You are not waiting to be chosen anymore. You are walking in the awareness that your presence is already a gift. When the avoidant finally understands your worth, it's only a reflection of something you've already come to know. You were never replaceable because your love was never about being wanted. It was about being real. You didn't need to be chosen to matter. You mattered all along, and the moment you see that for yourself, you stop waiting for anyone else to confirm it. In the end, this isn't a story of loss, it's a story of recognition. The moment you realize you were never replaceable, you stop mourning who left and start honoring who stayed. You showed up, you loved, you learned, and that courage becomes your legacy. Let their understanding come when it comes. Your healing is already here. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for remembering that the love you give is a reflection of the strength you carry.